Hey guys, what's going on? It's Eli, back with another review video, and continuing on with the Superman review marathon on the weekends. So, what I'm reviewing next, and as was teased in the last review video, because I mentioned a documentary and what this documentary is specifically about, that's in relation and has something to do with Superman himself. Yeah, and if it was obvious what I described, and well, you're now watching my review of what this documentary is that has something to do with Superman, you know. Yes. So that's right, guys. I am now reviewing from 2015, and not to mention that this documentary is celebrating its anniversary, that being the death of Superman Lives. What happened? So yeah, the death of Superman Lives. What happened documentary that was done by the late, legendary Jon Schnepp. Yes, from Collider Videos and a prime staple of Comic-Con. He had done Adult Swim. This guy just, yeah, how can we not love this guy? Especially since he was definitely one of those, big comic book fanatics, and, even with what Kevin Smith had to say about Jon Schnepp when, Kevin Smith at Comic-Con paid tribute to Jon Schnepp, and rightfully so, said that Jon Schnepp belonged at Comic-Con. There's no denying that, yeah. And, the fact that before Jon Schnepp stepped in the picture making this documentary, nobody, and according to Kevin Smith, nobody had no interest in making a documentary about this canceled Superman film that was supposed to be directed by Tim Burton and would feature Nicolas Cage as the starring titled character. But Jon Schnepp himself, when he stepped in, he took it upon himself and he made this documentary out of his own pockets. He funded it himself, and boom, look what we had gotten from Jon Schnepp. How it was done by Jon Schnepp. Perfection on everything we know about the history and making of what would be the ultimate Superman film that would lead to being canceled by Warner Brothers, and what it could have been, what this Superman film could have been, and seeing Nicolas Cage as the titled character, the Man of Steel himself, and with Tim Burton's direction and style, with what he would have brought into life in this Superman flick. I tell ya. So, yeah. And the first things I have to say, not just about the documentary, but me knowing about the history and facts that there was supposed to be a Superman film that was directed by Burton and starring Nicolas Cage. Well, I think for me, probably I want to say, I think it was my dad that brought this up from the start to me. And I really have no recollection, like, the very first time I knew about this, but like I said, probably my dad was one of those that brought this up to me, and I think probably my mom as well, but yeah, my memories on when I first knew about what would have been a Superman film starring Nicolas Cage is very fuzzy, but yeah, knowing about it more, and, with me seeing the documentary, because, man, this could have been really something. Even the later talks I had with each of my parents, and at that time, because when they heard about this in the late 90s, they were excited about this. My mom, definitely, because when my mom and I one time talked about, the canceled Superman film, which would have been titled Superman Lives, of course, starring Nicolas Cage, she thought it was exciting seeing Nicolas Cage as the Man of Steel, and I'm sure, and yeah, obviously the same would go for my dad. But yeah, just, with the troubles that, everybody was having, trying to get this movie underway, they had art concepts, they had ideas, and the script for Superman Lives was done by 3 writers, and with Burton stepping in the picture, Jon Peters being one of the main guys, being responsible and involved in, the making of Superman Lives, being responsible for bringing in, say, like Kevin Smith, Tim Burton, and the suggestion on Nicolas Cage being the titled character. Just, yeah. And, all that time they went through doing costume testing, and coming up with ideas for what could be done in this Superman flick, with the wardrobe designs, the style and look of Metropolis, Krypton, Brainiac's ship, the various alien creatures we get that we would have gotten in Superman Lives. Very interesting, yeah. But, for me, because I really enjoyed this documentary from beginning to end, when I finally got to watch it, and as of now, I'm reviewing this, and, even having done a rewatch of it. Yeah, because it's really extraordinary what was brought to this documentary by the late Jon Schnepp, that he made this documentary come to life. That's all about, the canceled Superman film, everything from beginning to end, and all the various people that Jon Schnepp interviews, with the exception of Nicolas Cage. That's a shame that wasn't able to get Nicolas Cage in this documentary. I don't know, maybe he just wasn't available, that's my guess, but yeah. But hey, at least Jon Schnepp got, say, Jon Peters and Tim Burton. That's awesome. But yeah, and because more stuff that, well, yeah, because stuff that I didn't fully know about with the history and the making of what would have been Superman Lives is interesting. Even before I had seen the documentary, well, because I had seen very few pics of Nicolas Cage in the Superman wardrobe, and that infamous photo that, even with what's brought up in the documentary, that Bryan Singer, who directed Superman Returns, he would have that photo of Nicolas Cage in one of the Superman wardrobes to whip out and show to the executives of Warner Brothers, but until I talk more about that later. And, because the other photos that would be published, and with what's in the documentary, well, yeah, because it could have been something. And the various costumes and wardrobes that the character of Superman would have had, and, yeah, really awesome. And, especially since, Nicolas Cage being a big fan of the Superman character and understanding everything about Superman. And no wonder he was a perfect choice to play the title character if this movie had existed. But nowadays, Nicolas Cage has technically gotten to play Superman, and I think, just, yeah. Well, at least, hey, we got, Nicolas Cage being Superman technically does exist as of now, but yeah. But, back on point with this, because, yeah, just overall, for me, because I, even having done a rewatch, it's a really well-put documentary by the late Jon Schnepp, with everything we got to know more about what would have been this very interesting, different take on the Man of Steel himself, and with what Burton, Nicolas Cage, Jon Peters, and everybody involved would have brought into this, now canceled Superman film. Really good. Okay, so, with the first things I've had to say about The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened documentary out of the way, now, as always, for me, read the description / the story, the overview. Jon Schnepp, Devels, I think I might be mispronouncing that one word, but just, you know me sometimes, bear with me, into the story behind the proposed film to be directed by Tim Burton, with Nicolas Cage starring Superman. Okay, so let's dive in / get into the documentary itself, break it down. So yeah, well, yeah, so where I want to start off first, well, because yeah, like, the intro to this documentary that Jon Schnepp does, because, going back in time in the late 90s, back before, the superhero genre nowadays really blew off, and back then, we'd have to wait 3 years for a comic book movie to exist and such, just, yeah. But, yeah. But, because with the early beginnings of this planned Superman film, well, because, yeah, I mean, first off, have to acknowledge Jon Peters, this big-time producer who actually started off being a hairdresser. Yeah, even Jon Peters establishing this, and yeah, I think it's obvious that nowadays you wouldn't have realized that Jon Peters, this big-time producer, was once a hairdresser. Not to mention that it's mentioned very briefly that he and Barbra Streisand would have a relationship, and yeah, when he was a hairdresser, he did help and provide the hair curls and everything like that for Barbra Streisand's hair. Jon Peters, when he then started to make his way into the movie producing business, and somewhere later on, well, he would wound up getting attached to acquiring the Superman film rights, because, yeah, when that happened, well, Jon Peters had a meeting with the Salkinds about, acquiring the rights to the Superman films, and doing the next Superman film on the big screen, and Warner Brothers not being involved in this, and, this was before the internet, and, yeah, Warner Brothers having no full knowledge on what was going on, and they actually didn't have a saying on this, as I recall, and with what's established in the documentary. And, the inspiration and what was drawn for, developing this planned Superman film, being that was going to be produced by Jon Peters, well, with Kevin Smith stepping into the spotlight, and he was actually one of the first writers to step in to do a script draft of this planned Superman film, which would have originally been titled Superman Reborn. And Kevin Smith, he thought that was not a very good title, and even when he read the script. And thus, it was Kevin Smith who decided to change the title of the film from Superman Reborn to Superman Lives, and he actually said that that was borrowed from Fletch Lives, yeah, if you know about that. So yeah, and I think, yeah, because seemed like a very fitting title, Superman Lives. And especially, this is also brought up, in the early 90s, especially because at that time, the current last Superman film, which of course being Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, tanked hard, and that's what killed the original Superman film series. There was at one point in the early 90s, DC Comics' plan to kill off Superman. The whole, death of Superman thing, and with, Lex Luthor, Brainiac, and most prominently Doomsday, and with what the documentary establishes on that. And eventually, of course, yeah, it didn't take too long for DC Comics to resurrect Superman. And, well, with incorporating that stuff from those comics into this planned, developed Superman film, yeah, seemed very interesting. Not to mention that even the later mentionings of the Superman comics drawing inspiration for this planned Superman film, one other thing is the fact that in the Superman comics in the 90s, for a while, Superman did have long hair, so thus, that's why when Nicolas Cage was supposed to be Superman, he has long hair. So, yeah, that seemed acceptable. And you know what? I think the whole thing on Superman having long hair and the fact that it's Nicolas Cage, I think it does fit pretty well. Only Nicolas Cage could pull that off. Be Superman with long hair. But, maybe not just Cage, but, maybe others. In fact, coming back to Kevin Smith, because, yeah, with Kevin Smith having some talks with Jon Peters, and with what each Smith and Peters are talking about and describing, well, there were 3 suggestions and notes that Peters gave to Smith about what to do for the script of Superman Lives. 1, Superman doesn't fly. 2, Superman does not wear the suit, the getup, and with what's on my shirt. And yeah, those first 2 things that Peters recommended and suggest, what was he thinking? Even when I shared that to each of my parents, they thought it was baffling too. Wouldn't you? If you take those 2 things away from Superman, there's no Superman. That doesn't say anything about the character. Those 2 things that he has, that says it all about the character. Those 2, and not to mention that, he needs to have his cape. Like, if you take the cape away, there's really no Superman. And it's just, the same would go for Batman. Without his cape, Batman's not Batman. Not entirely. And yeah, Kevin Smith, that was said by Kevin Smith with what Peters suggested. Those first two things that were recommended by Peters. And then when cutting back to Peters, Jon Schnepp mentions that to Peters. Peters denies that. But I believe on Kevin Smith's case, yeah, because, brother, just like, why would Peters deny that? Just, God, I don't know. And Jon Peters saying that, of course he has to fly. But you recommended it. You said it to Kevin Smith. You're obviously denying it. You just don't want to be putting the spotlight on that. I don't know. Yeah. And the third recommendation / suggestion that Peters gave to Smith was there has to be a giant spider in the film that Superman would go against. And with what each Smith and Peters were describing about the whole spider thing was, there has to be an epic moment, a climax, like, obviously in the third act of the film, with whatever it is that Superman comes face to face with. And, seeing as how in the previous Superman films at the time, because with what Superman was going up against, well, like, most prominently, he went up against the three Kryptonian criminals, Zod, Non, and Ursa, or say in Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, he went up against Nuclear Man. So yeah, and to do something different and not have it be another, villain in, spandex and stuff like that would fight against Superman. Now, I think that the idea of this giant spider and the way that they would figure out what else to do with this giant spider, a name that Kevin Smith would give it, as long as it's not called a spider. Warner Brothers telling Kevin Smith, like, as long as it's not a spider, like, this name that you came up with is okay. We don't freaking care. Yeah. And it seemed to me, with what was planned for this giant spider in Superman Lives, well, seems interesting. Well, besides, because with this being a giant spider-looking creature, well, obviously it would come from outer space, and more than likely, it would have connections with Brainiac. Like, I think it's obvious that probably Brainiac would be responsible for unleashing this spider-like alien creature, and the designs and looks for this alien-like spider creature, like incorporating like some crab claws or stuff like that, just, yeah, pretty interesting. Yeah. So yeah, Jon Peters recommending that to incorporate a giant spider. So thus, yeah, Kevin Smith incorporating that in. And then when it would come to, like, say, who would be the director of this picture? Well, one of the biggies for both Kevin Smith and Jon Peters, coincidentally, is Tim Burton. Yeah, even from the beginning, Jon Peters knew that, Tim Burton would be the perfect choice to helm this planned Superman film. And the same goes for Kevin Smith, because especially since, seeing as how Tim Burton, brought to life another iconic comic book hero in the world of DC, brand new and fresh, which of course being Batman. So it seems obvious that, yeah, whom better to bring back Superman in a brand new way, well, would be Tim Burton. And yeah, as I mentioned, the fact that Tim Burton is a part of this documentary, Jon Schnepp sits down and talks with Burton at his, at his house in London. It's really cool. And even Jon Schnepp getting some shots of what is inside of Tim Burton's house, some posters of monster films that he grew up with, some dead masks, the death masks of, like, say, Vincent Price, and photos of, say, Vincent Price, Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, etc. And, well, with Burton explaining that, he grew up with, monster films, but also he liked some of Batman. He's on and off about liking comic books, and most prominently Batman. And he liked The Killing Joke and a few others, but yeah. And, with his attachment to doing Batman. Same goes for Jon Peters. Jon Peters was attached to 1989's Batman. And also mentioning that Burton, he was not too, I guess, comfortable being around Jon Peters when it came to Batman 89. And it's explained that, Burton having Batman 89 be filmed in London to basically just, keep away from Jon Peters, and with what the documentary specifically states on that. Okay, so now let's talk about the other people that would be involved in, the making of this planned Superman film. Because we've got our director, Tim Burton, but the others that would be involved, and those that have worked with Burton in the past, because rightfully so, some of them being involved doing Superman Lives, because one of the top biggies that Burton had worked with in the past being Rick Heinrichs, if I'm saying his last name right, but yeah, he and Burton go way back, because when we come to Rick, because Tim and Rick first knew each other when each of them had gone to Cal Arts, and then when they would wound up being a part of the Walt Disney Company, and, well, Rick most prominently working alongside with his buddy Tim on a few projects that Tim was allowed to do. The Walt Disney Company gave him permission to make a few projects of his for them, which one of them most prominently being Vincent. And with seeing what Rick does in the movie industry, and what he would do after, first working with Burton and then other projects that he would be involved in, well, he would become a production designer. Yep, because, of course, having worked on production designs for some of Burton's films, but other big films that he would do, and because, he's been a production designer, he's been in the art department, and the visual effects, those are the three most biggies that he's done. And, well, he basically states that right after he completed working on Big Lebowski for the Coen brothers, he got this call, the offering and such to be a part of this planned Superman film that Burton was going to direct. And thus, him hopping on board and doing what he does to, to incorporate and such into the Superman film. And the others that would work with, that have worked with Burton before, because, I mentioned Rick, but there was also, Michael Jackson, although, his middle name, let me see, because that being, Michael Anthony Jackson. And no, because not Michael Jackson of Bad, Thriller, Beat It. No, this is an entirely different Michael Jackson, and hence his middle name, Michael Anthony Jackson. Michael Anthony Jackson, who has worked with Burton before, he most prominently worked with Burton on, say, Batman Returns and Mars Attacks. And what he does in the film industry is, well, art department stuff. Other films that he, also, another biggie that he worked on with Burton was Big Fish. So that's another biggie. And man, because he's also done, say, Thor Ragnarok and the first Iron Man film, and with what I'm looking at on his IMDb page. But, point being is that, with Michael Anthony Jackson getting an offer to be a part of this planned Superman film, well, he had just gotten the offer to work on the first Matrix, and one day after getting the assignment to work on the first Matrix, he left that project to do the planned Superman film. Well, I mean, because, obviously, having worked with Burton and, pretty excited about this, and with what he specifically says. So Michael Anthony Jackson's involvement in Superman Lives, and with him doing the art department stuff, and the same goes for Rick, with what they were doing with, the concept arts and stuff like that for the planned Superman film, Superman Lives, and other, other faces that had worked with Burton before in the past, most prominently, costume designer Colleen Atwood. Yes, because Colleen and Burton, they first crossed paths when Colleen got to do the costume designing for Edward Scissorhands, and from there on, just, yeah, Colleen Atwood always doing the costumes and wardrobes for any film that Burton has done. But other works that she had done in the movie business of costume designs and that are brought up, like, say, Philadelphia, 1994's Little Women, and, yeah, a bunch of others at that time. And with her being attached to Superman Lives, well, she had never done anything like this. And, you know, the challenge for her to do the costumes and designs for Superman Lives, especially being in charge of the costuming and designing for the titled character, his wardrobes and such, yeah. And the others that would be involved, like, say, Steve Johnson, Derek Frey, Timothy Burgard, and Dan Jurgens, Peter Von Schally, Sylvian Desperates, James Carson, Bill Bowes, Ronald G. Smith, Leonard McDonald, Bill Ryan, someone else who's done visual effects and stuff like that, and he most prominently had worked on Ghostbusters, so his involvement in Superman Lives, Liam Sharp, Derek Thompson, Carrie Gamil, Brahm, and also, yeah, there are a few that actually don't appear on screen, and actually, because there are times where we would cut to, say, reenactments of, you know, what would have been and visualized for Superman Lives, like, yeah, and they're credited as recreation scene actors. So, Amanda Ray Troisi, if I'm saying her last name right, she plays the recreation scenes for as Lois. She plays Lois Lane. I'm sorry, I'm kind of saying it backwards. She plays Lois Lane for the recreation scenes, and also someone by the name of Keeg Neutron. I think I'm getting his first name right, I want to say. Yeah, if I'm pronouncing it right. Yeah, he's not credited for whatever it is that he does in this, but yeah. But, yeah, a guy by the name of Matthew Hiscox, yeah, he is Superman in the recreation scenes, yeah. But yeah, so everybody else that would be involved in the planned Superman Lives documentary, and yeah, let's go ahead and talk about, like, say, yeah, what I did bring up, the production designing, the artwork, and ideas and concept sketches, you know, with how the film would look, with its style and such, yeah, because, you know, very interesting. It's very interesting when looking at these concept art pics, you know, the designs, the work that was put into those drawings and sketches, even Burton himself, the sketches that he had done for the planned Superman film, and what he envisioned for Superman Lives, and how the characters would be depicted, their look and style in this variation of this Superman flick. Like, most prominently, Brainiac. The way Burton envisioned Brainiac, like, just a head on spider mechanical legs. And there would be, like, an idea, like, say, his whole body, supposedly, would be covered by a cape, but when the cape is, you know, pulled off, just like, yeah, it would reveal these mechanical spider legs and such. And the idea of Brainiac being in, like, a snow globe, and that was, like, inspired from, like, say, Madame Leota and the Haunted Mansion, and also, like, this spider mechanical creature that Burton brings up that he remembers seeing in Jonny Quest. Yeah, and if you know what I'm talking about, yeah, referring to, and with what Burton's referring to. Yeah, and just these really interesting and bizarre ideas for what would have become Brainiac in Superman Lives. And the way that the costumes would have looked, obviously having that dark tone to it. But at the same time, it is mentioned at one point that Burton was taking the challenge to go in a different direction. You know, like, most of his films at that time were like in the shadows, but what he wanted to do for Superman Lives was to be out of the shadows, you know? And the fact that there were a few times in some of Burton's films that we did see some blue skies, like, I can think of, like, say, Edward Scissorhands or Mars Attacks. At least, like, in Mars Attacks, most prominently, it had some color to it, but at the same time, still, like, in a darker tone or something like that. You know what I mean? Just, yeah. Yeah, when it would come to, like, say, the costumes and designs for Superman suits, well, one of the most prominent ones that I think we all know very well on is, like, say, Superman's glowing, energetic suit, you know, and when it would come to, like, say, the costume wardrobe tests, you know, some, you know, crew members would try out bits and pieces of the suit. Then when it would come to Nicolas Cage showing up and trying out the suits, and just the way that they were designing them, and, you know, especially the torso, you know, the body to Superman's suit. And then when it would, like, come to, say, some, like, you know, like, glass pieces or something like that, you know, something that was done before in, most prominently, The Abyss, the film that James Cameron directed. So, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So, by using that kind of equipment, and by incorporating it into one of Superman's suits, basically it's to this suit that Superman is supposed to wear at one point, well, it would help regenerate him, you know, give his strength back, you know? Very interesting, and just the way that they were making it, and with light testing, and just, man, it looks really cool. Looking at the behind the scenes, the archival footage, you know, the daily videos of them, you know, working on the wardrobes and suits for Superman, really interesting. And yeah, when at one point they show a lot of where we see footage of Nicolas Cage, Tim Burton, Colleen Atwood right there, and Nicolas Cage is trying on each of the various suits for Superman, and the conversations that each of them are having, and, you know, with what they mention about the Superman character, and, you know, what to do for the Superman character. And even, like, say, when Nicolas Cage is wearing one of the wig pieces, the long hair, and, you know, Nicolas Cage growing very fondly of the hair piece, or, you know, when, like, say, at one point they talk about the underpants that Superman wears outside. Well, it's not really supposed to be underwear, okay? Just come on, you know, bear with it. But the way that they did it for this, yeah, I mean, pretty interesting. And the fact they did put some muscle marks into the suits, and, well, most infamously, when at one point we see that, yeah, photos were taken of Nicolas Cage in one of those suits, and the most infamous one that, yeah, would make its way out there online, and, well, and because I mentioned Bryan Singer, because when it came to, say, Bryan Singer working on Superman Returns, and when it was mentioned that Warner Brothers, the executives at Warner Brothers, were complaining about, you know, the way that Brendan Routh's Superman suit was turning out, and how it specifically was looking, and with the underpants and all that, well, Bryan Singer whipping out the photo of Nicolas Cage in the Superman suit, and getting them to basically shut up, and telling them that, you know, you were going to make this. So, yeah, I get where Bryan Singer was going with that. It's true, but yeah. And yeah, because, as I just said, that did get the executives of Warner Brothers to just zip it. Yeah, and just let Bryan and the others do what they were doing for Superman Returns. And yeah, you know, a good majority about Superman Returns is brought up, and with what Kevin Smith and Nicolas Cage, they each had to say about when Superman Returns happened. Because, as we all know, Superman Returns was, you know, sticking with, you know, the way that the first Superman films were done by Richard Donner, that tone and vibe. And the fact that Superman Returns is supposed to be in connection, most prominently with the first two Superman films. And you know all this, but yeah. Yeah, and, and just overall, because with what they were coming up with, most prominently for Superman's suit, the various different wardrobes and different tones of blue that they were doing, and when it came to the capes, and the mentioning of the cape being its own character, yeah, and with what they talk about the cape, and even in those archival footage when Nicolas Cage was testing out the wardrobes of Superman. And when they were talking about the cape, and Nicolas Cage, like, coming up with these lines, like, my father wore this cape, and it's been in every generation of the Kryptons, and stuff like that. Pretty interesting, you know, the direction they were taking with Superman's cape. And also, like, the mention, also when, like, it came to, say, Clark Kent, you know, that being a different personality for Superman that he goes under, Clark Kent. And the wardrobe testing for Clark Kent that Nicolas Cage was doing, like, most prominently, like, okay, he has to have the glasses, but also by throwing on a Mickey Mouse shirt. Because, you know, with what is brought up about, you know, with the direction that they were taking with the character of Superman in this, and which Burton had done in his previous films, the fact, and even with what Jon Peters also says about this, that Jon Peters most prominently says that we're all aliens, you know, and some of us not feeling as though we fit in with the crowd. And if you look at the films that Burton had done, especially those in the early 90s and in the 80s, the various characters from, like, say, Edward Scissorhands, Lydia, Bruce Wayne / Batman, you know, because, you know, they're different, and, you know, because being in the outside world and, like, you know, not really fitting in and such, and we've all been there, and obviously, you know, I've kind of felt that way too at times, and I'm sure you have. Those of us that are on the autism spectrum, and yeah, the same goes for Burton. Burton as well being on the autism spectrum, and his experience when he was a child, you know, and with what's brought up about him. In fact, you know, there was one photo that was shown of Burton in his Halloween costume that his mom made for him. Yeah, cute. It's a very understanding topic that's brought up, and with what they were going to do with the Superman character, because, yeah, Superman who comes from another planet, you know, he's not like anyone else, most prominently on Earth, and his presence on Earth, and even with him going as Clark Kent, very different, just, yeah, it's a very understanding and interesting topic. Definitely, and with what they all specifically say. But yeah, and that's, yeah, that would have been very interesting, yeah. And talking more about Nicolas Cage, because, yeah, I believe as though, yeah, Nicolas Cage, he was literally one of the very first choices, if not the only choice, for playing the titled character, and it was pretty exciting for when Nicolas Cage was cast as Superman, and as I mentioned that, well, the fact that he is a huge fan of the character, and that was actually one of his dream roles, and you can imagine, because, you know, how excited it must have been when he was finally given the chance to play Superman, but of course that didn't come to be. Yeah. But yeah, so, you know, the fact that with what they say about Nicolas Cage, how he is as an actor, yeah, really fantastic. And the fact that, you know, they mention about not just Nicolas Cage, but also Michael Keaton, because, you know, at that time, yeah, before Batman '89 came out, everybody panicked. They were pissed. Even my dad was one of those people where nobody thought that it was going to work. Michael Keaton is Batman, and whom previously was Mr. Mom and Beetlejuice? How? How is that possible? But when the film itself came out in 1989, all of those doubts that people had, they thought that it was gonna be a disappointment and disaster for Michael Keaton to play the title character. They all went away. And now Michael Keaton, nowadays, being the fan favorite. Oh, yes. And yeah, because, like, them talking about that, you know, each Michael Keaton and Nicolas Cage, not the best-looking men, but they technically are. Come on, you know? You know, because it was very fitting with Michael Keaton playing, you know, the title character Batman and also Bruce Wayne. he's also demented and such, and yeah, the rage and performance that Michael Keaton gave to not just Batman, but also Bruce Wayne, and even when they play a clip where, Bruce Wayne and Joker first meet, and Bruce Wayne just, now you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts. Like that right there, fantastic. When Bruce Wayne is just himself and not as Batman, excellent. And when, talking about, say, Nicolas Cage being casted as Superman, and just, because he would have been great. He definitely would have been great as Superman, and also Clark Kent. Okay, but stepping away from Nicolas Cage being cast as Superman, I think I pretty much talked a good majority of that. Others that were in consideration to play the other characters in the planned Superman film, Superman Lives, from Brainiac, Lex Luthor, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, because those that they had in mind, for, say, Lois Lane, well, it came down to, say, either Courtney Cox or Sandra Bullock. Either one of them would have been pretty good as Lois Lane. And according to Jon Peters, apparently Sandra Bullock turned it down. But even Jon Peters saying that probably nowadays Sandra Bullock would do it, but back then she didn't want to. Whom was in consideration most prominently for Jimmy Olsen was apparently Chris Rock. I'm sure, for Chris Rock being casted as Jimmy Olsen might have been good, and with what Chris Rock, would have brought to the role of Jimmy Olsen, obviously, because Chris Rock, being well aware and familiar with the character of Jimmy Olsen, and, wanting to stay true with Jimmy, I presume. And whom would be considered for, say, Brainiac? Well, Burton especially had Christopher Walken in mind, because with Christopher Walken, in consideration for Brainiac, and, just how he would have turned out as Brainiac would have been very interesting. And that's me especially because, he's definitely got the creepiness, and, well, even when, say, he would get to work with Burton in Sleepy Hollow as the Headless Horseman, definitely. And in consideration for Lex Luthor, the biggest being Kevin Spacey. And this is, of course, before we would actually get to see Spacey as Luthor in Superman Returns. I'm pretty sure that for Spacey having played Luthor in Tim Burton's Superman film would have been very interesting. And when more concept art, pieces are shown, when we, see Luthor's wardrobe and design, that would have been very interesting. And it looks as though that, in those concept pieces with Luthor's wardrobe, well, he has hair. So I assume that, Luthor would be wearing, a wig piece, as, he's usually done. Even, when in Superman Returns, there are times where Luthor did wear wig pieces. But, so I have no doubt that, with whatever Spacey would have brought to the role of Luthor in that Superman film, would have no doubt been really good. But, since we eventually did get Spacey as Luthor in Superman Returns, still turned out a really good Luthor. And not to mention, there was a consideration that at one point in the film, Brainiac and Luthor would merge together. Basically, this side of his face would be Brainiac, but when the head turns, the back of it would be say, Luthor and such. Now, as best example, think of it as say, I don't know, because in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, we have Voldemort on the back of Professor Quirrell's head. Something like that, as an example. In fact, one movie that was brought up by Burton that, might have been similar to what they were going for had that happened with both Brainiac and Luthor, them merging. And if I remember so, I will put the name of that movie in a text because, Burton bringing that up and just, Well, and not to mention that Spacey, as we all know, being so good at doing impressions. Well, because they play a clip of Spacey at the AFI at one of the AFI presentations, where he does an impression of Christopher Walken, and of course he's good at it. So there's no doubt that, probably Spacey would do some Walken, had that happened in the Superman film. Just, so good. Yeah, that would have been great. But yeah, and they pretty much just, that's all they bring up on whom else was considered to be in this planned Superman film. Just, the casting choices for Luthor, Brainiac, and Lois and Jimmy. Just, them. No mentioning of, say, Perry White or, say, Jor-El. But, speaking of Jor-El, and coming back to, the production design work for how the movie would have turned out, how it would have looked, well, because, for Metropolis, where they would have filmed Metropolis would have been, say, at Pittsburgh. And definitely the buildings that are at Pittsburgh and what they were going for definitely suited for them, and because, this is a Superman film that's directed by Tim Burton, because, with the building that was chosen to be supposed to be LexCorp, and the one for Daily Planet, because especially for Lex's main building, LexCorp would have had that gothic vibe and feel, and for Daily Planet, and Kevin Smith, because at one point, coming back to Kevin Smith, because, he unfortunately didn't get to be a part of the planned Superman film very much longer. In fact, his script was turned down, most prominently by Burton. And that's when, the next writer that would step in to, work on the script for Superman Lives is Wesley Strick, who, had worked with Burton before, and Wesley Strick was in charge of working on the script. However, Warner Brothers did want to keep some various lines and such that were in Smith's draft of the script. But Smith, not getting away from, the development of Superman Lives, because, the other projects that he was working on, and when, say, he would be working with Chris Rock mentioned to Smith that he's been cast as Jimmy Olsen, or when Smith was supposed to film a movie in Pittsburgh, and was supposed to use the building that was going to be used for LexCorp. Just, really cool. So, it's nice to see that, Kevin Smith technically still being a part of the planned Superman film, with what was in his script still being kept, because Warner Brothers wanted to keep various stuff that he put in the script. But anyways, what else? Because coming back fully to the production artwork and such, because with them choosing Pittsburgh to be the filming location and setting to be Metropolis, the idea and sketches for Krypton, very interesting, and with what Burton's take on Krypton was going to be like, and with how the Kryptonians, work and such on Krypton, and because them, charging themselves up, they got various pieces, on their fingers and their toes, hence, Superman having a suit that recharges himself, and also, the design and look of Brainiac's ship was literally supposed to be like this skull, and the way that the interiors described and depicted on how it would look being constructed. In fact, Superman Lives was supposed to use the sound stages of 15 and 16, and especially for stage 16, they would have used that sound stage to, construct the sets and interiors for Brainiac's ship. Not to mention that it's brought one of them in this documentary brings up that, because the Warner Brothers logo, in the late 90s and early 2000s, because it shows, some of the sound stages, and one of them being stage 15, because, that stage 15 would have been where they filmed Superman Lives. Because, just overall, because with what was planned for Brainiac's ship, not to mention, the various alien species that were designed and would have been on Brainiac's ship. Very interesting. They would have been very interesting. Not to mention that, the Fortress of Solitude. I think, John Peters brought this up to Smith, when Smith was still attached, that Superman should have bodyguards at his Fortress of Solitude. But, Smith saying that Superman lives alone. Why would he need bodyguards and stuff like that? And at one point, John Peters recommended that it should be 2 polar bears. And one idea where, with Brainiac making his way to the Fortress of Solitude, the 2 polar bears are there, and Brainiac easily taking down one of them, like literally lasering one of them to death, and all that remains is, like, say, their skeleton. But another idea would be, like, say, these, snow-statued polar bears, to scare off anybody that approaches the Fortress of Solitude. But, technically, okay, there have been times that Superman would have someone in his Fortress of Solitude. Especially because with James Gunn's Superman, where we have these Kryptonian robots, the robots of the Fortress of Solitude. So there's that, but yeah, still. And also because, anything else to say? Well, no, because, that's pretty much it on the Fortress of Solitude. But I have no doubt that, for the Fortress of Solitude, how it would have looked, and the interiors of the Fortress of Solitude inside would have been very interesting, because, the various other art picks, concept designs that, of how the style and look would have looked for Superman Lives, very interesting. Then, because, also, because I talked about the costume and wardrobes and such, because, again, with them working on the costumes and such for Superman, them further testing them some more. Also, can't forget to mention this because there were a few suggestions that Warner Brothers gave to them, even, with what Colleen Atwood and the others had to say about this, where apparently, they only bring this up because I know, and if anybody has seen the clip of where, Burton was on Howard Stern's show, and when they talk about the canceled Superman film, well, Burton brought this up where, 2 things that, the executives wanted for the suit, and only one is brought up in the documentary, because, most prominently, from Colleen Atwood and Burton, bringing up that, say, they feel that Superman should have, Michael Jordan or, Shaq's shorts, why? Ugh. Or even, say, on the bottom of Superman's boots, they should have, flames or something. Oh, good Lord. What are they thinking? Just, God. But thankfully, none of that happened. But just the further on they were working on the suits, even when say, it came to the flying test shots, even ILM to be involved in this, looking pretty good with those test shots. And also, not to mention that another scriptwriter being brought in to work on Superman Lives, and that being Dan Gilroy. And with what, with what he was doing and his involvement in Superman Lives, just, 3 writers, just, sometimes not a good sign. And also because, when it would come to, say, the budget of the film, how much it was going to cost to bring this film to life, and with everything that was put into this, how this movie was going to turn out. Well, not to mention it's brought up where, at that time in the 90s, Warner Brothers definitely was having a huge amount of movies of theirs that were not doing good. Obviously, there were a few that they had in the 90s that did pretty well, but most of them just, And obviously, one of them being Batman and Robin, no duh. And they weren't making that much money in the box office, and again, when it would come to the budget of Superman Lives, very expensive, and feeling that, the movie had to be cut down some, the budget had to be cut down some, but to go ahead and mention this and to speed things up some, because, in the end, sadly, the planned Superman film, all that hard work they put in to get this movie underway. In fact, according to Jon Peters, they were very soon about to start production, get this film rolling, and from there on. But Warner Brothers bringing in Jon Peters, Tim Burton, and the others, some of them, yeah, but most prominently Peters and Burton, bringing them in and telling them that the movie is dead. Warner Brothers officially canceling the movie. It's not going to be made. Even Jon Peters was attempting to try to get it made, get it back on the greenlit, but nope, that was the end of it. In fact, even Jon Peters brought up that Burton didn't speak to neither Peters or anybody else for at least a week or a month. And yeah, unfortunately, yeah, Superman Lives, in the end, ultimately, yeah, just didn't get made. And what would happen next for Jon Peters and, yeah, most of the crew members of Superman Lives? Well, they would wound up being a part of this other project of Warner Brothers that would come out in 1999. And the fundings for Superman Lives were given for this movie, and that being Wild Wild West. Yes, directed by Barry Sonnenfeld, Will Smith, Kevin Kline, Kenneth Branagh, just, yeah. In fact, yeah, because with Jon Peters being involved in Wild Wild West, and especially since, you know, Will Smith said yes to Wild Wild West, just, yeah, so Wild Wild West being in the works, and that being an expensive film that they did, you know, with the budget it had, the fundings that were first given to Superman Lives, but now given to Wild Wild West. And yeah, Wild Wild West, unfortunately, when it was released, another stinker for Warner Brothers, yeah. But, you know, I think in hindsight, for some people, including me, yeah, would view the Wild Wild West film as a fun, entertaining film. Just, yeah, obviously there are those out there like me that would come to actually like and have fun with this movie. Same goes for my mom, because when my mom and I were talking about Wild Wild West, yeah, her being on the page that, you know, this movie could be fun and entertaining. And yeah, because you know what I'm saying, and with mine, same goes for my mom. And I'm sure maybe you guys would be on the same page too. But anyways, yeah, so with Wild Wild West being made, and yeah, even like, you know, Dan Gilroy and John Schnepp mentioning that that's a whole nother story about Wild Wild West, another documentary, I would agree. And Kevin Smith mentioning about his experience when he saw Wild Wild West. And at one point in the film, we see a mechanical spider. And yeah, because with Jon Peters having wanted a spider in the Superman film, which didn't happen, now to have that in Wild Wild West, and, you know, it's acceptable because, you know, a lot of steampunk stuff in Wild Wild West. And, yeah, a mechanical spider that's big and such. Just, yeah. And Kevin Smith commenting that, you know, Jon Peters finally got his effing spider. Just, yeah. Oh, by the way, because speaking of the F-bomb, because when talking more about Batman 89, Jon Peters brought up that originally, apparently Batman saying his famous quote, "I'm Batman," it was supposed to be, "I'm Batman, mother effer," but Warner Brothers forcing Jon Peters to let go of the F-bomb. And, you know, probably for the best. Because, let's face it, you know, I don't think including mother effer into "I'm Batman" would not be, I don't know, because just Batman alone saying just the two words, "I'm Batman," and especially with Michael Keaton having said those two words, does make it epic. And it became an epic quote, if not one of the top quotes of the Batman character, thanks to Michael Keaton and how he delivered it when Batman made his first, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, entrance. Yeah, his entrance at the start of Batman 89. Yeah, with those two crooks on top of the building. Just, epic. Just really epic. But yeah, but again, because with Wild Wild West being made, the fundings from Superman Lives being incorporated into Wild Wild West, Jon Peters ended up getting his spider that he wanted for Superman Lives. And with what Jon Peters specifically said about the mechanical spider in Wild Wild West, just, yeah. Just, you know, and again, Superman Lives not being made. But nowadays, and even with the documentary, because, looking back fondly on what would have been, even with what, Nicolas Cage through archival recordings, audio recordings, where, with it not being made, it's fun to look back on something that they were working on just, with what he specifically said. Even Nicolas Cage made a comment, and it's shown in the documentary, what he had to say about Superman Returns. Yeah, not exactly what was intended. It's the total opposite of what Nicolas Cage was going to be a part of, bringing the title character to life, but just, yeah. But again, Superman Returns was, with what I said, being in connections with the first two Superman films that Donner did, the tone and vibe of that, just, yeah, And yeah, just the fact that also, with what was going to be incorporated into Superman Lives, with the whole thing of Superman dying, Doomsday and such, well, I mean, the later projects that would have to do with Superman, like, well, Superman Doomsday, the animated film, or, like, say, in Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, with those incorporating Doomsday and the whole thing of Superman dying, just, yeah. Hey, at least we technically did get to see that. And when it would come to, like, say, the Justice League, most prominently Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League, seeing Superman in that black, dark suit and such, yeah. Minus the long hair, yeah. Henry Cavill did not sport long hair. Would have been cool, but, probably for the best. Oh, and not to mention, because, yeah, the whole thing of, like, when it would come to Superman dying in Superman Lives, well, around that time, Princess Diana had just died, and Jon Peters, calling up one of the writers, telling them that, they should draw inspiration on what happened with Diana's death, because, as we all know, I'm sure, after Princess Diana's death, like, her funeral was, like, massive. And by incorporating and taking inspiration from that, because, yeah, how much of a huge impact it hits the citizens of Metropolis. Thousands gather at Superman's funeral. Even, like, say, in the comics, other DC heroes, like most prominently Batman, attend to his funeral. And apparently, this would have been a part of Superman Lives, where, having Batman make an appearance in Superman Returns, and it might have been Michael Keaton. And Michael Keaton as Batman, Batman appearing on the giant TV screens of Metropolis, giving a statement and message, because of the loss of their hero and stuff like that. Just, yeah, would have been awesome, But, of course, with that not happening, and, because could you imagine if, like, maybe possibly we could have had, like, say, Michael Keaton and Nicolas Cage as those two iconic superheroes cross paths, and maybe if it had happened in Superman Lives? But, yeah. And also, yeah, because I think that's pretty much it for what all I have to say about Superman Lives. And, yeah, the final words and thoughts that everybody that was going to be involved in Superman Lives, yeah. And when it comes to Tim Burton, because Tim Burton's saying, ask me when I'm 90 and such, we're gonna make this, just with what Burton said, and yeah, that's how the documentary ends. And as I mentioned earlier, because even though we didn't get to see Nicolas Cage, being Superman at that time, well, technically, we would eventually do get to see him. We would get to see him as Superman. Like, yeah. Well, and you know what those are, because Nicolas Cage got to voice Superman in the Teen Titans Go movie, and, technically, we got to see Nicolas Cage as Superman on screen, in live action, in The Flash. But not exactly what we expected, because, yeah, the appearance of that variation of Superman, which being Nicolas Cage, being completely CG. And apparently, Nicolas Cage himself stated that he was there on set, filming his cameo for The Flash, but for it not to be used, and the way he describes the costume that was made for him as Superman not being used. Why? Because, well, that was a total waste. Like, golly. I don't know, because, yeah, I mean, with what Nicolas Cage had to say about that, I'm sure you're aware of this, like, yeah. But, at the same time, at least we still got somehow got Nicolas Cage's Superman on screen, and that being in The Flash. Not to mention they do have Superman fighting, you know, the giant alien spider creature. So at least we got that, but yeah. Yeah, but just, yeah. Yeah, again, I think I pretty much said all that I've had to say about the documentary. Yeah. So, yeah. So the final words and thoughts I have to say about the documentary. Yeah, The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened? It's a really good documentary. Everything about it from beginning to end, with what Jon Schnepp brought to this documentary. He made this documentary on his own. He funded this documentary his own out of his pockets, and bringing this documentary to life, going into full detail what this was going to be like. This canceled Superman film that would have been directed by Tim Burton and Nicolas Cage playing the title character. The ideas and concepts that were going to be incorporated into this Superman flick, and how the style and look would have been, those that were involved, the casting choices besides Nicolas Cage, the costumes, the wardrobe, and, you know, the 3 different writers that were attached, Warner Brothers not behaving with the development and progress of the planned Superman film, and for them to just flat out cancel it, just overall, The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened? It's a really good documentary, and of course I would recommend it, yeah. And I'm giving Superman, the Superman documentary, The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened? I give it, well, yeah, what the heck, 8 out of 10 stars. Yes, 8 out of 10 stars for The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened? And what about you guys? What did you think of the documentary itself, all about the canceled Superman film, Superman Lives, that would have been directed by Burton and starring Nick Cage as the Man of Steel himself? What were some of the things that you knew about some, but didn't know fully until you had seen this documentary? How were you first aware of the canceled Superman film, and with those very first public photos of Nicolas Cage in the Superman getup, and when it came to this documentary? You know, what are some of your favorite parts and subjects that are brought in this documentary, with what Jon Schnepp brought to this documentary? And if any of you had been familiar with the late Jon Schnepp, even before, you know, stumbling upon this documentary, overall, what do you think of the documentary, The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened itself, and with what I've had to say, my review, and yeah, what did you think of my review? Leave comments and give this review video a like, as always. And so, with all that being said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of the documentary, The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened? More review videos are coming your way. They're going to be awesome. Keep looking forward, and I will see you guys in the next video / review. And, well, continuing on with the Superman review marathon, stay tuned because I will be reviewing another documentary that, well, obviously has to do something with Superman. But it's not just about Superman. It's most prominently about the man who brought this character to life, and at that time, in the late 70s, made us believe that a man can fly. Yes, this documentary, that's all about Christopher Reeve himself. And you know exactly what it is that I'm talking about. So yeah, again, stay tuned for that. My review of Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. Yeah. Take care. Rest in peace to the late, great Jon Schnepp, and peace out.